It starts like any other story of sibling rivalry, two sisters close in age, bound by blood, but divided by something far more dangerous than simple jealousy. Beneath the surface of smiles and shared memories lurked something sinister, something that would fester, grow, and eventually destroy lives. This is the story of Penny Sullivan, a woman whose envy twisted into hatred, a woman who couldn't stand to see her younger sister happy. A woman who, when faced with the reality that her sister was about to start a beautiful new life, decided she couldn't let it happen. And so she made a choice so dark, so monstrous, that it would leave an entire family shattered. What does it take for someone to betray their own flesh and blood in the worst way imaginable? What does it take to set your own sister up for the ultimate violation? Tonight, we dig deep into the chilling truth behind Penny Sullivan's crime, the setup, the betrayal, and the horrifying act she orchestrated just one day before her sister's wedding. This isn't just a story of jealousy. This is a story of manipulation, cruelty, and a crime so vile it still haunts those who lived through it. As you listen, ask yourself, what could drive someone to do this? What could push a sister to cross a line so horrific that there would be no coming back? The police reports paint a chilling picture. The interviews with family members reveal cracks in the facade Penny had built for years. The text messages, well, they tell us everything we need to know about her true intentions. And by the time this story is over, you'll see just how far one person can go when they let envy take over their soul. But before we unravel the crime itself, before we examine the evidence that sealed Penny's fate, we need to go back to where it all began. Back to the two sisters, their complicated bond, and the seeds of hatred that would lead to one of the most shocking betrayals in true crime history. This is the true story of Penny Sullivan, and this is the night everything changed. To understand why Penny Sullivan would go to such extreme lengths, we must first dive into the history that shaped her. Her childhood, her relationship with her family, and the bond she shared with her younger sister. A bond that, on the surface, seemed like any other sibling connection, but underneath there was a storm of resentment and jealousy brewing for years. Penny Sullivan grew up in a quiet suburban town. She was the firstborn, the one who was expected to set an example. From an early age, Penny's parents placed a lot of pressure on her to be perfect. She excelled in school, she was the responsible one, the one who had it all together. But for all the accolades she received, something was always missing in Penny's life. She longed for attention, validation, and a sense of control over the world around her. Her younger sister, let's call her Rachel, was a stark contrast. Rachel was always the easygoing one. She was loved effortlessly by those around her. Her radiant smile and outgoing nature drew people in. Penny couldn't stand it. The way Rachel's charm made everyone in the room gravitate toward her. It ate away at Penny's pride, and she felt overshadowed. It was like Rachel had something that Penny could never have, something that made her feel inferior despite all of her own accomplishments. From an early age, Penny could see how different Rachel was. While Penny was more reserved, constantly working to please their parents and prove her worth, Rachel was free-spirited. She didn't need to try so hard to be loved. The attention Penny had spent her entire life trying to earn was given to Rachel without effort. Penny watched her little sister's life unfold with what could only be described as envy. But Penny didn't outwardly show her resentment. She was too careful for that. No, Penny was smarter. She knew how to mask her feelings. To the outside world, Penny was the picture of a loving older sister, someone who would protect her younger sibling, support her, and be there for her whenever she needed. But in the quiet moments when no one was watching, Penny's mind worked differently. There were whispers in the back of her mind, thoughts of what would happen if Rachel wasn't around. Let's take a look at Rachel, the younger sister, the one who had it all. Rachel wasn't perfect, far from it, but her imperfections were easy to overlook because of the ease with which she navigated life. She was the popular one. She was the one who got all the compliments. Her social life was thriving, her grades were decent, and she had a boyfriend that loved her dearly. Everything was falling into place for Rachel, especially as her wedding day approached. The day Rachel announced her engagement, Penny's world started to change. It wasn't that Penny didn't want her sister to be happy. It was more that Rachel's happiness felt like a reminder of everything Penny could never have. Penny had tried to make relationships work, but something about her domineering nature and constant need for control kept getting in the way. Unlike Rachel, Penny couldn't just let things flow. She had to work for every bit of affection and attention she received, and even then it never seemed like enough. As Rachel's wedding day neared, Penny's resentment began to boil over. The jealousy she had suppressed for so long grew into something darker, something far more dangerous. It wasn't just about feeling left out of the spotlight anymore. It was about feeling that Rachel had everything Penny couldn't have. And in that moment, Penny made a decision, one that would change the course of both their lives forever. But how far would Penny go to make sure she wasn't overshadowed anymore? What lengths would she be willing to take to remove the one person who, in her mind, stood in the way of her happiness? As we continue, we'll see the early signs of a plan that was set in motion, one that no one could have seen coming. But we need to ask, before we move on to the twisted events that unfolded, was Penny always this way? Was the jealousy just a product of her circumstances, or had something darker always been lurking beneath the surface? Let's go back to their childhood, where small, subtle signs of Penny's resentment began to show themselves. Perhaps there were moments, quiet moments, that hinted at the darkness within her. Did Penny always have the capacity for betrayal? Let's dig deeper into Penny's mind, into her relationship with Rachel, and start to unravel how this innocent-seeming sisterhood morphed into something horrifying. The story of Penny and Rachel's relationship cannot be told without revisiting a key moment in Penny's life, something that would define her existence for years to come. Penny had always lived in Rachel's shadow. It wasn't that Rachel intentionally outshone her. No, Rachel was simply herself. But in Penny's eyes, that was enough. It was as if Rachel's very presence dimmed everything Penny had worked for, and Penny could never escape it. As young girls, they were often compared, often by strangers, but more so by their parents. Rachel, with her carefree, magnetic energy, seemed to effortlessly win the love and attention of everyone around her. Penny, on the other hand, was always the overachiever, the one who worked for her affection, and the one who believed that she could earn love through perfection. But no matter how much she excelled in school or how many awards she won, it was Rachel who stole the spotlight in every room. Penny's jealousy festered quietly at first. It was just a feeling, a subtle gnawing sensation, that Rachel's success, beauty, and charisma were things that Penny could never attain. Rachel never had to try. People naturally gravitated toward her, complimented her, admired her. Penny worked tirelessly to achieve recognition, but it was never enough. She looked at Rachel's effortless charm and saw her own failures reflected in it. By the time they reached their 20s, the competition between the two sisters had only grown more pronounced. Rachel, effortlessly beautiful and loved by everyone, had a steady stream of suitors. Penny, though not unattractive, was always seen as too intense. Her need for validation clouded her ability to form lasting, meaningful relationships. Penny found herself stuck in a cycle of short-lived romances, while Rachel seemed to glide through life, her love life seemingly perfect. Rachel met her fiancé, someone who adored her, and everything seemed to fall into place. Penny? She was still searching for the one. When Rachel announced her engagement, Penny's entire world seemed to shatter. Her younger sister, the one who had never struggled for love or approval, was about to get everything Penny had longed for: marriage, affection, the perfect life. And Penny? Penny was still on the outside, still overshadowed, still longing for something she could never seem to have. This moment of realization, this collision of Rachel's life with Penny's deep-seated insecurities, was the tipping point. It wasn't just about resentment anymore. It was about desperation. Penny had spent so many years trying to prove herself, trying to earn love, only to see Rachel glide through life as if it were all handed to her. And now, the final blow, Rachel's wedding, was looming. Penny was supposed to be happy for her sister, but instead, something darker began to take root in her heart. She was overwhelmed with rage, not at Rachel, but at the world that kept giving Rachel everything Penny could never attain. The events leading up to Rachel's wedding day were the culmination of years of quiet jealousy, resentment, and emotional buildup. Penny couldn't escape the thought that Rachel was about to get everything, the perfect life, the perfect love, and it was all happening while Penny remained stuck in the shadows. Penny's obsession with being the center of attention, her need to be validated, had taken a sinister turn. She began to imagine what it would be like if Rachel were gone, if there was no one left to overshadow her, if she could finally have everything she had worked for without the competition. It wasn't just jealousy anymore, it was possession. Penny felt entitled to Rachel's happiness, and when she couldn't have it, the idea of taking it away seemed like the only way to feel fulfilled. Psychologist. Sibling rivalry, while common, can sometimes spiral into something far more damaging. In some cases, a sibling can develop a deep sense of envy that goes beyond the typical rivalry and turns into a psychological fixation. This fixation can be exacerbated by a sense of competition, particularly when one sibling seems to achieve things with little effort, while the other feels they must constantly work for approval. In Penny's case, the jealousy likely deepened over time, and the stark comparison between her life and Rachel's created a sense of entitlement and possessiveness. Penny wasn't just envious of Rachel's happiness. She was angry that she couldn't attain the same effortless love and success. This led to her destructive desire to level the playing field, if you will, by eliminating what she saw as her greatest obstacle to happiness, her sister. The expert's words echoed in Penny's mind. She was no longer just a jealous sister. She was consumed by an overwhelming need to have it all. The comparison between her life and Rachel's became all-consuming, a constant loop of despair and rage. Penny saw Rachel's success as a reflection of her own failure. Every achievement Rachel made felt like a rejection of everything Penny had worked for, and no amount of hard work, no amount of self-improvement could change that. In Penny's mind, the answer became clear. She had to do whatever it took to remove Rachel from the equation. It wasn't just about taking Rachel's place in the spotlight, it was about taking away the one thing that Rachel had that Penny couldn't. Love, approval, and happiness. Penny believed that if Rachel were out of the picture, she could finally have what she deserved. And with that thought, the plan began to form. Rachel's wedding announcement was the moment everything changed. The joy in the Sullivan family was palpable, as Rachel had found her soulmate, the man she was to marry, just a day before the fateful events. It was supposed to be a time of celebration, a time when the whole family came together, basking in the glow of Rachel's happiness. But to Penny, it was the final insult. She had spent her entire life watching Rachel effortlessly win everything, from admiration to love, and now this. Rachel, the golden girl, was about to marry the man of her dreams, while Penny remained alone, her heart heavy with unspoken jealousy. On the surface, Penny played the part of the supportive older sister. She smiled at Rachel's glowing face, clapped enthusiastically during the engagement announcement, and even helped with some of the wedding preparations. But beneath the mask, there was something else. Beneath the smile, there was a simmering rage that Penny had been holding in for years, and now it was boiling over. Penny could not escape the feeling that Rachel had everything she wanted and more, while Penny, despite her hard work and accomplishments, had nothing but loneliness. As the days leading up to the wedding passed, the tension between the sisters became palpable. Family and friends who had been around Penny for years began to notice her odd behavior. There were moments when she would stare at Rachel with a cold, calculating look, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. It wasn't just the usual sibling rivalry. It was something much deeper, much darker. One friend recalled a particular moment when Penny, after hearing an enthusiastic conversation about Rachel's dress fittings, excused herself abruptly from the room, her face ashen. Her laughter was forced, her words too quick, almost as if she were trying to convince herself of something. In another instance, Penny offered to help decorate for the wedding, but her hands shook uncontrollably as she arranged the flowers, her eyes never straying far from Rachel's wedding photos. The behavior was inconsistent with the image of the caring sister. Something was amiss. But what no one knew, what no one could understand, was the deep, festering resentment that had been building up for years. Resentment that no one could see until it was too late. Penny's life, at least the part she kept hidden, was a series of heartbreaks. She had loved and been rejected countless times, but there was one love that had shaped her entire life, a man she had once believed was the one, a man who had shown her affection, made her feel special, and for a brief moment made Penny believe that love might be within her grasp. But like so many other men before him, this one chose Rachel. It was a moment that haunted Penny for years, when the man she loved, the man who had whispered sweet nothings in her ear, had turned his attention to Rachel. Penny had caught them once, Rachel and the man she had been dating, laughing and holding hands in the corner of the living room. Penny stood frozen, watching as Rachel was adored and admired once again, while she, the older sister, was left in the background, unseen and unwanted. The rejection wasn't new, but this one stung more than the others. It wasn't just that the man chose Rachel over her, it was that Rachel, without even trying, had something Penny could never have. And this sense of failure, of never being enough, never being loved as she was, grew into a dark obsession. The rejection from this man was the tipping point, the breaking of something inside Penny that could never be fixed. There were whispers from family members who had observed Penny's loneliness over the years. They noticed how she would get agitated when the subject of relationships came up, especially when someone mentioned Rachel's fiancé. Penny, who had once dated a few men, had long given up on finding a partner. She spent her nights alone, consumed by the notion that love was something that had eluded her, something she could never have. As Rachel's wedding drew nearer, Penny's bitterness grew. In her mind, the only way she could find peace was if Rachel's wedding were to be disrupted. If Rachel's life, which had seemed so perfect, were somehow derailed, then Penny could finally feel justified. She could finally take control of a life that had always seemed just out of reach. Penny felt trapped by the expectations of being the perfect older sister, the one who should be happy for Rachel, who should help her with wedding plans, who should smile and pretend everything was fine. But deep down, Penny's jealousy and resentment were tearing her apart. Every little thing Rachel did, every moment of joy and love she received, was a reminder of what Penny could never have. And the more Penny buried those feelings, the more destructive they became. In a small, quiet room, Penny sat alone, her thoughts swirling. She stared at the wedding invitation Rachel had handed her weeks ago. The gold lettering shimmered, mocking Penny as if it were a symbol of everything she couldn't have. The weight of the invitation felt heavier than it should have, pressing down on her chest as she read it again. Rachel was getting everything she had ever wanted: the man, the perfect life, the love. The crushing loneliness Penny felt, compounded by years of jealousy, began to morph into something darker. Her mind worked overtime, running through the scenarios, running through the what-ifs. What if Rachel didn't marry him? What if she didn't go through with the wedding? This was the moment when Penny's mind crossed a line that would lead her down a path no one could have predicted, a path that would change the course of their lives forever. But the deeper Penny sank into her envy and anger, the clearer it became. If she couldn't have the life Rachel had, then no one would. In the next part of the story, we'll follow Penny's disturbing decision to take matters into her own hands, a decision that would set the stage for one of the most shocking and tragic acts of betrayal a sister could ever commit. As the wedding day drew nearer, Penny found herself in a state of constant turmoil. She would lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of Rachel's happiness, of the life she was about to step into. The bitterness, the jealousy, the resentment, each emotion gnawed at her insides, and slowly a dark realization began to take root in her mind. If she couldn't have happiness, if she couldn't have the life she felt she deserved, then neither could Rachel. It was a thought that haunted her every waking moment, and with that thought came a chilling decision, one that would tear the fabric of their family apart. Penny's mind, once clouded with feelings of inferiority and rejection, now became crystal clear in its malevolent intent. She would make sure Rachel would never walk down the aisle in the happiness she so undeservingly had. "If I can't be happy, neither can she," Penny whispered to herself in the quiet of her bedroom, her voice low and venomous. It wasn't just jealousy anymore. It was rage, pure and simple. A rage that had been building for years, festering in the dark corners of Penny's mind, and now it was ready to explode. This wasn't about the man Rachel was about to marry, or the life she had built for herself. This was about control. Penny wanted control over the narrative, over the happiness of her sister, over the course of their lives. If she couldn't have it, no one would. Penny's behavior became increasingly erratic. To those around her, the change was noticeable, small but unmistakable. She began to isolate herself, spending less time with family and friends, withdrawing into her own dark thoughts. The once lively, albeit competitive, older sister was now a shadow of her former self, pale and distant. When she was in the presence of others, her mind was elsewhere, constantly thinking of how she could execute her plan. It was no longer about supporting Rachel or helping her with the wedding. It was about creating the conditions for Rachel to fail, to suffer, to lose everything she held dear. It didn't take long for Penny's friends to start noticing that something was off. They observed her slipping away, emotionally and mentally. She stopped attending gatherings, began making excuses to avoid family events, and her interactions became stilted and curt. But the most alarming change was the strange late-night phone calls Penny would make. Her friends overheard bits and pieces of the conversations. Hushed tones, filled with secrecy. There was no way of knowing who she was talking to, but the content of her conversations left them uneasy. Penny spoke in code, her words sharp and fragmented, as if she were plotting something with careful precision. Her closest friend, Sarah, was the first to voice concern. "Have you noticed how Penny's been acting?" she asked another mutual friend, her voice filled with worry. "She's been making these weird phone calls, and it's like she's hiding something. I don't know what's going on, but it feels like she's pulling away from everyone." It wasn't just the phone calls. Penny began acting with a certain coldness that unsettled those who had once been her confidants. She would avoid eye contact, rarely laughed anymore, and when asked about Rachel's upcoming wedding, her responses were always clipped, forced, like the mention of Rachel's happiness triggered something deep and dark inside her. The fact that Penny, who had once been known for her playful, albeit competitive nature, now spoke so little and seemed so withdrawn, left her friends feeling like they were no longer dealing with a person they once knew. But no one could quite put their finger on it. No one could have known that this sudden distance and secretive behavior were signs of something much more sinister brewing beneath the surface. Penny was planning something, and every call, every strange look, every withdrawal from her loved ones was a calculated move to prepare for what she believed would be the ultimate payback. In the midst of this growing suspicion, Penny's heart grew darker. She began to experiment with ways to put her plan into motion, reaching out to people from her past, people who could help her achieve her goal. She had spent years perfecting the art of manipulation, of keeping her true feelings hidden behind a veneer of politeness and charm. But now, those skills were being used for a purpose far more destructive. Her phone calls, cryptic, disjointed, were made to people from the fringes of her social circles. The names were unremarkable, but the intent was clear. Penny was quietly orchestrating a plot that would devastate Rachel in ways she couldn't yet imagine. There was no turning back now. Penny had crossed the line. By the time Rachel's wedding rehearsal took place, Penny had already made up her mind. It was no longer about the man Rachel was marrying. It was about taking control of Rachel's happiness and turning it into her own. If Penny couldn't experience love and joy, she would make sure that Rachel would never experience it either. But just as Penny thought she was on the verge of achieving her twisted goal, cracks began to form in her carefully constructed world. Penny's behavior had begun to raise suspicion among those closest to her, her friends, her family. They could all sense something was wrong. They just couldn't figure out what. And yet Penny's resolve only strengthened. The jealousy, the bitterness, and the pain that had driven her to this point were now the fuel that would carry her through to the next stage of her sinister plan. The days leading up to Rachel's wedding were like ticking time bombs. As the bride-to-be prepared for the happiest day of her life, Penny's mind was already set on the destruction of her sister's future. And now, for Penny, it wasn't just about the jealousy of a sibling. It had transformed into something far more sinister. She needed help to carry out the unthinkable. A plan so dark, so calculated, that no one would see it coming. Penny knew that for her plan to succeed, she couldn't do it alone. Penny's path crossed with a man who had become a key player in her horrifying plot. His name was Marcus Clark, an ex-convict with a criminal history and a reputation for getting his hands dirty when needed. He had once been in Penny's life years ago, but the paths they walked had diverged. Now he was back in her world at the precise moment when she needed him most. Penny reached out to Marcus under the guise of rekindling old friendships. He had always been a man of few words, someone who carried an air of danger with him, but also someone she knew could get things done. Penny knew exactly what strings to pull, how to manipulate him, how to use the dark hold she had over him from their past to get him to do her bidding. Marcus wasn't the type of man to ask questions. He only cared about one thing, the payout. Penny's approach was simple but sinister. She flattered Marcus, stroked his ego, and slowly, deliberately, led him into her web. She didn't tell him everything right away. No, Penny wasn't that foolish. Instead, she gave him pieces of the puzzle, ensuring he didn't fully understand the endgame. All Marcus knew was that Penny had a job for him, and it would pay well. But what she withheld from him was the depth of her true intentions. She didn't need him to understand the full picture, just enough to ensure he did what she needed. Behind the scenes, Penny's phone became a lifeline to Marcus. Texts, calls, and coded messages flowed between them in a rapid-fire exchange that seemed innocent on the surface, but in reality, these communications were the scaffolding of a crime that would shock everyone who knew the sisters. Chilling text messages began to appear on Penny's phone. Messages that she exchanged with Marcus, each one revealing a deeper layer of her plan. Penny was precise, methodical. Her messages to Marcus were short but heavy with implication. It's almost time. Everything needs to go according to plan. The night before, she'll be alone. Make sure the timing's right. She trusts me. She's blind to what's coming. Marcus responded in his own cryptic way, his texts colder, more calculated. I know the drill. We do this right, and it's done. You'll get what you need. She won't even know it was me. Their exchanges weren't filled with the kind of affection you might expect from two people with a history. They were stark, to the point, and increasingly chilling. The more Penny and Marcus communicated, the closer the execution of the plan came. Penny had successfully manipulated Marcus into becoming her accomplice, but the question remained, how would she pull off the perfect crime? Penny had already begun to prepare the groundwork. As the wedding day approached, she started to act on her most insidious ideas. She knew the schedule of the wedding events, the layout of the venues, and the time when Rachel would be most vulnerable. Penny began to observe Rachel's movements carefully, taking mental notes of the places she frequented and the people she spent time with. All the while, Marcus was in the background, ready to act when the time came. The most chilling part of this entire scheme was how Penny managed to cover her tracks. She wasn't just relying on Marcus to do her bidding, she was using technology to her advantage. Surveillance footage hacked into the hotel security system where Rachel would stay the night before the wedding became part of Penny's twisted preparation. She had access to the cameras, the blind spots, and the hallways that would allow her to see everything before anyone else had a chance to react. In one particular instance, Penny sent a message to Marcus. "I've got access to the security footage. It'll be easy to manipulate things. Just make sure everything is set up before she arrives." With every passing hour, Penny tightened her grip on the situation, controlling the very environment around Rachel. As the wedding rehearsal took place, Penny was already mentally preparing for the moment when everything would fall into place. Rachel had no idea that the sister who had been by her side for so long was about to betray her in the most unimaginable way. But it wasn't just the surveillance and the texts. Penny had taken further steps to ensure her plan went undetected. She had manipulated her sister's schedule to ensure Rachel would be alone at the critical moment. Penny knew Rachel would be staying at the hotel the night before the wedding, a quiet time where there wouldn't be many guests around. It would be the perfect opportunity. There would be no witnesses, no one to stop what was about to happen. And so, Penny's plan, set in motion weeks ago, was coming to fruition. The last pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. As the evening drew closer, Penny waited for her sister to fall asleep, to let her guard down, just as Penny had planned. She would act swiftly, ensuring that her sister's joy would be shattered forever. But just as Penny prepared to make her final move, there was a moment, a single fleeting moment, when doubt crept into her mind. Was this really what she wanted? Was ruining her sister's life the answer to her own pain and bitterness? It was a question that lingered in the air for just a moment, but it was quickly drowned out by the sound of her phone vibrating in her hand. "Everything's set. We move tonight." And with those words, Penny's decision was final. No more hesitation, no more doubt. What followed would forever change the lives of both sisters in a way no one could have ever imagined. Stay tuned as we uncover the chilling next chapter of this tragic tale. Penny's plan was now in its final stages. The details were all in place, and the clock was ticking down to the moment that would change everything. Rachel's wedding, the most anticipated day of her life, was now only hours away. But Penny wasn't focused on the wedding. She was focused on something much darker, something far more devastating. Her mind raced as she calculated the final steps. To execute the ultimate betrayal, Penny needed to get Rachel alone, and she knew just how to do it. Penny's approach was subtle but manipulative. Nothing too obvious, nothing that could raise suspicion. The trap was set to unfold slowly like a carefully constructed spider's web. The night before the wedding, Penny reached out to her sister with a carefully crafted excuse. "Rachel," she said, her voice laced with feigned sweetness, "I was thinking, you've been so stressed with all the wedding preparations. How about we have a little girls' night out? We can go out for drinks, talk, laugh. You deserve a break." Rachel, eager to enjoy a little reprieve before the whirlwind of her big day, was grateful for the gesture. She agreed, unaware of the twisted intentions behind Penny's offer. Penny knew that Rachel would be up for a night out with her. It had always been something the two sisters enjoyed together in the past, a tradition of sorts. But this time, Penny had an agenda. She needed Rachel to be away from the hotel and the comfort of the wedding party for just a few hours. Time was of the essence, and Penny's plan had to be executed to perfection. But Penny wasn't just asking Rachel to go out for a night of fun. No, Penny had other plans. Plans that would ultimately lead her sister into danger. The girls' night out would be just the beginning. Penny had set up the perfect excuse for her sister to leave the hotel, away from the eyes of the bridal party and the watchful gaze of friends and family. Penny had made sure Rachel would be alone, trusting that her sister would not suspect a thing. Oh, the trap was set. Penny played the role of the loving older sister, coaxing Rachel out into the night like a lamb to the slaughter. As the evening wore on, Rachel grew excited about the night ahead, not realizing the lurking peril she was about to walk straight into. Penny's carefully controlled calm hid the storm brewing within her, a storm that had been building for years, culminating in this very moment. The fake girls' night was a ruse, an illusion. Penny suggested a bar on the outskirts of town, a quiet, dimly lit place where they could talk and enjoy a drink. The perfect setting. What Penny didn't tell Rachel was that she had already set everything in motion. The real plan wasn't to enjoy a night out, it was to lure Rachel away from safety. Penny made sure Rachel was away from the wedding party, from the hotel, and from the protective eyes of friends and family. Alone, Rachel was vulnerable, just the way Penny had orchestrated it. At the bar, they sat at a corner booth where Penny charmed her sister, as always. They talked about the wedding, Rachel's excitement, her hopes for the future. But beneath it all, Penny's thoughts were dark and cold, her gaze calculating. Penny had already made sure Rachel would be separated from the group. Soon Rachel would leave alone, unsuspecting, and head back to the hotel. And that's when the real danger would begin. As the evening dragged on, Penny played her part, ensuring that Rachel's guard was down. Then, just when Penny felt the time was right, she dropped the bombshell. A phone call. A fake emergency, of course. "Rachel," Penny said, her voice trembling slightly for effect, "I just got a call. Mom's not feeling well. I need to go check on her. I think she might have fallen." Rachel's eyes widened, concern overtaking her face. Penny had told her the perfect lie, one that would make Rachel feel like she was needed elsewhere. The plan had worked flawlessly. As Rachel made the decision to head back to the hotel to check on her mother, Penny offered to walk her to the door. But instead, as she stepped into the night, Penny's heart raced with anticipation. The night air was cool, but Rachel had no clue that it was the calm before the storm. Penny watched as her sister walked toward the exit, every step unknowingly bringing Rachel closer to the fate Penny had so meticulously crafted for her. The streets were quiet, the sounds of a city winding down for the night. Penny's pulse quickened. She had to make sure Rachel took the bait. Make sure she followed the path that would lead her straight into the hands of Marcus, waiting in the shadows. Penny made her way to a secluded alley just outside the bar, her heart pounding in her chest. There, she took out her phone and sent a final message to Marcus. "She's on her way. Now is your time." With that message, Penny stood in the shadows, watching her sister's every move, making sure she wouldn't turn back. It was happening. The moment she had been waiting for was finally here. As Rachel walked down the street, unaware of the danger creeping closer, Penny stayed in her place. She watched from the shadows, her heart racing as her sister unknowingly approached her fate. The trap was set. Her sister would walk straight into the arms of Marcus, who was lying in wait, ready to make Penny's sickening plan a horrifying reality. The clock continued to tick. Every second seemed to drag on longer than the last. Penny knew that once Rachel crossed the threshold into that dark alleyway, there would be no turning back. Penny had lured her sister to the very edge of her nightmare, and now all she could do was watch in silence, knowing what was about to unfold. Penny felt a brief wave of emotion. Perhaps it was regret, perhaps it was doubt, but it was too late for that now. As Rachel turned the corner, she unknowingly walked right into the darkness that had been carefully prepared for her. Penny's heart clenched in her chest. The trap had closed around her sister like a vice, and just like that, Penny left her sister at the mercy of the very man she had manipulated into carrying out this horrendous act. The plan was complete. The trap had sprung. The night that was meant to be Rachel's last before her wedding, the night that should have been filled with excitement, anticipation, and dreams of a bright future, became a nightmare, one that would forever haunt the lives of everyone involved. In the distance, Rachel's cries for help are muffled, the sound drowning in the isolation of the street. Dutch, we've got an assault in progress. Female, approximately 25 years old. Suspect unknown. Victim's been left in a vulnerable state. We're sending backup, requesting immediate assistance. The voiceover cracks as the voice fades out, the rest of the conversation unintelligible. The next moments are shrouded in a disturbing silence. As the attack came to an end, Rachel was left broken, physically, emotionally, and psychologically. What followed in the aftermath of that horrendous night was an unimaginable level of betrayal. The attack on Rachel was a horrific act, but what was perhaps even more chilling than the crime itself was the behavior of Penny in the hours that followed. To the outside world, Penny Sullivan acted as if nothing had happened. To the public, she was the concerned older sister, the one who comforted Rachel in her time of need. But behind closed doors, Penny's true emotions began to surface, like a sickening smirk hidden beneath her mask of concern. In the hours after the assault, Penny received the call that would change everything. When the news broke, when she learned what had happened to her sister, it should have shattered her. But Penny's reaction? Cold, calculating, and almost indifferent. The phone call came through to Penny's phone in the middle of the night. The voice on the other end was frantic, the words blurring together with shock and confusion. "Penny, it's Rachel. She's been attacked. We found her in the alley. She's in critical condition." The words were like a punch to the gut, but Penny didn't flinch. Instead, she simply listened, her eyes distant. She put down the phone and made no outward expression of shock. The shock came later, when she would walk to the hospital, pretending to be devastated, pretending to care. The next day, Penny went to the hospital, her face masked in grief as she walked beside her sister's hospital bed. Rachel, battered and broken, lay unconscious, unaware of the devastating truth that had unfolded. Penny held her hand, pretending to comfort her, offering words of support and sympathy that she didn't mean. But inside, Penny was reveling in the satisfaction of what she had done. "Don't worry, Rachel. You're safe now. I'm here," Penny said with a trembling voice, the kind of words that should have shown genuine concern. But when the hospital staff weren't looking, Penny's smirk would emerge, briefly flickering across her face, only for it to vanish in an instant. Friends and family saw the concerned older sister. They saw Penny in public, playing the part of a loving sibling, comforting Rachel and offering support. But behind closed doors, Penny's true nature began to unravel. In the quiet of the night, Penny would sit alone, her eyes wide with something far more sinister than regret, an eerie satisfaction, perhaps even a sense of triumph. As Rachel lay recovering, physically, emotionally scarred, Penny's heart swelled with a twisted pride. She had done it. She had successfully destroyed her sister's future. Meanwhile, the police began their investigation. Evidence was gathered, and the trail led back to the dangerous man Penny had been in contact with, the man who had carried out her plans. But for Penny, the real satisfaction came in knowing she had remained untouched by the consequences. She didn't panic. She didn't crack under pressure. Instead, she watched from a distance as the investigation unfolded, and she took solace in the fact that her sister would never be the same again. As Rachel's world crumbled, Penny remained in the shadows, moving ever closer to the edge of her twisted victory. The horror of what had happened would soon hit Rachel. She would soon come to understand the extent of the betrayal, but for now, Penny was cold, indifferent, and calculated in her role as the ever-perfect sister. All of Rachel's suffering was merely a price Penny was willing to pay to finally step out of her sister's shadow. This was only the beginning. The crime was committed, the aftermath was set in motion, but the deepest darkness, the real revelation, was yet to come. Rachel's life, once filled with joy and anticipation for her upcoming wedding, was now engulfed in a darkness from which there seemed to be no escape. The day that should have been the happiest of her life, a day to celebrate love and new beginnings, was forever tainted. It wasn't just the trauma of the assault itself. but the horrific realization that the person who had been closest to her, the one she had trusted most, had set the stage for this nightmare. The groom, John, a man who had been eagerly awaiting the moment he would say, "I do," to the woman he loved, stood in shock, devastated by the revelation. The woman he had planned to marry, the one he had dreamt of building a future with, was no longer the person he thought she was. His bride, now broken and battered, had been the victim of a heinous crime, and it was a betrayal from someone so close to her. It shook him to the core. John's initial reaction was confusion. He didn't know what to think. How could this happen? Why would someone do this to Rachel? But when the investigation unfolded, when the details came to light, John's world was shattered. Penny, Rachel's sister, had been the architect of the most grotesque plan he could ever imagine. The news hit like a wrecking ball, shattering their relationship. It wasn't just the emotional devastation, but the sense of betrayal that was impossible to escape. John had never expected such cruelty to come from Rachel's own flesh and blood. As the wedding plans came to a screeching halt, the once vibrant excitement around their wedding quickly dissolved into nothing but the grim realization of what had occurred. The marriage, the celebration of love, had to be postponed, perhaps even canceled altogether. The grand plans for their future were reduced to ashes. Rachel was no longer a woman filled with wedding day joy, but someone who was struggling to stay afloat in an ocean of grief and trauma. She was a shadow of the person she once was, her world forever altered by the cruelty of the very sister she had trusted. The psychological scars Rachel carried were deep, etched into her mind and soul in ways that no one, not even she, could fully understand at the time. What had once been a beautiful, vibrant woman was now a broken shell, consumed by a darkness that clouded her every thought. Her trauma didn't just end with the attack. It compounded with the realization of the betrayal, the unthinkable horror of knowing that her sister, someone she had grown up with, shared secrets with, and loved, had orchestrated her suffering. Rachel was not only physically wounded, but emotionally and mentally shattered. The days after the assault were a blur. Rachel's family rallied around her, offering their support, but nothing could truly ease the pain she was now enduring. The wedding was a distant memory, a forgotten dream that now seemed like a cruel joke. She spent days in therapy, trying to piece together the fragments of her life and make sense of the horror that had been thrust upon her. But no amount of therapy could undo the damage that had been done, psychologically, emotionally, and even physically. She struggled with depression, her once vibrant personality slipping further into the shadows. The woman who had once radiated warmth and love, who had been looking forward to her big day, now found herself in a constant battle with dark thoughts and an overwhelming sense of hopelessness. Rachel became a prisoner of her own mind. In therapy sessions, Rachel would try to vocalize her pain. She would try to explain the confusion, the disbelief, and the overwhelming guilt she felt. How could she have missed the signs? How could she have been so blind to her sister's true nature? She grappled with self-blame, even though the responsibility for the attack rested solely on Penny's shoulders. The psychological scars began to show in other ways. Rachel couldn't stand to be alone anymore. She couldn't walk into the places where she and Penny had shared happy moments in the past without feeling the cold grip of fear and dread. Even simple tasks like going to the grocery store or meeting with friends became monumental challenges as flashbacks to that night tormented her thoughts at every turn. Her friends noticed the changes, how she had withdrawn into herself, how her once bright smile had faded into a somber expression. No longer was she the carefree woman who had once dreamed of a perfect life with her fiancé. Instead, she was someone trapped in a labyrinth of trauma that seemed impossible to escape from. Rachel's relationship with John, the man she had once dreamed of marrying, also faced an immense strain. He wanted to be there for her, to support her, but he didn't know how. How do you console someone whose life has been shattered in such a profound way? How do you rebuild trust when the person who should have been her greatest ally, the one person she thought she could count on, was the one who betrayed her in the most unimaginable way? John struggled with his own sense of betrayal, trying to reconcile the love he had for Rachel with the anger he felt toward Penny. The wedding, which was meant to be the beginning of their journey together, was now a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. The decision to postpone, then cancel, was a painful one, but it was a decision that Rachel would never regret. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Rachel faced the harsh reality that her life, as she had known it, was forever changed. Penny's actions had stolen her future, and though Rachel fought to reclaim some semblance of normalcy, she would never be the same. The trauma had left its mark in ways she never anticipated. Her scars were not just physical. Those would heal in time, but the emotional and psychological scars were something far more difficult to erase. Rachel's journey of recovery was long and arduous. She found herself seeking therapy more frequently, determined to understand the depths of her trauma and to find a way to live again. But there were moments, so many moments, when the weight of what had happened seemed insurmountable. Every flashback, every nightmare, every intrusive thought was a reminder of the evil that Penny had unleashed upon her life. Her story is one of survival, of slowly regaining control over a life that had been stolen from her in an instant. But it is also a story of unimaginable betrayal, a story of a sister who chose jealousy over love, hatred over family, and darkness over life. And as Rachel struggled to pick up the pieces of her broken life, Penny Sullivan's actions continued to haunt her. The wedding was just the beginning. The true cost of the betrayal was far greater than anyone could have imagined. The scars of the darkest night would remain forever, reminding everyone of the depth of Penny's cruelty. The aftermath of the attack was a tangled mess of confusion, fear, and betrayal. While Rachel's world had come crashing down, the wheels of justice were slowly but surely starting to turn. What Penny thought she could get away with, her scheme so carefully orchestrated, was beginning to unravel. As the days passed, the authorities began to piece together the shocking truth of what had happened the night before Rachel's wedding. It all started with the police investigation. Detectives, sharp and relentless, immediately zeroed in on Rachel's case. As the victim, Rachel's testimony was vital, but she was too broken, too traumatized to provide any real details about her assailant, other than the haunting memory of the attack itself. Still, the investigators knew that this wasn't a random crime. The circumstances surrounding Rachel's assault didn't add up. Why would a woman so close to her family, someone with no history of violence, turn into an architect of such a vile plot? The question lingered. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered something chilling, a trail of suspicious messages exchanged between Penny and a man with a criminal record. These weren't just casual conversations. No. These texts were a roadmap detailing a plan so nefarious it left no doubt about Penny's role in the crime. It wasn't just the content of the messages, but the timing. Penny had been in constant contact with this man leading up to the attack, and now the puzzle pieces were starting to fit together. The investigation uncovered even more. Penny's movements on the night of the attack were scrutinized, and witnesses were tracked down, their testimonies offering more clues that pointed in Penny's direction. While she had tried to cover her tracks, her alibi was weak, and the more the investigators dug, the more her story began to fall apart. Rachel's friends and family, although still struggling with the shock of the attack, began to recount Penny's strange behavior in the days leading up to the wedding. Penny had acted distant, as if she were hiding something. She had made cryptic statements that didn't quite make sense, almost as though she had been preparing herself for something. She had claimed to be too busy to participate in the final wedding preparations, but when pressed for details, her answers were vague and evasive. As the investigation deepened, Penny's behavior became even more suspicious. She seemed to go through the motions of normal life, comforting her family, pretending to be concerned for Rachel, but there was an unsettling undertone to everything she did. She smiled when others expected her to smile, but her eyes always betrayed her, too cold, too distant. When asked questions about Rachel, her responses were clipped, almost rehearsed. She avoided any real discussion about the details of the night Rachel had been attacked. Penny wasn't as good at hiding her guilt as she thought she was. Small slip-ups in her story, moments when she tripped over her words or gave contradictory answers, raised red flags with the investigators. They began to notice the cracks in her carefully crafted facade, the subtle signs that she was hiding something monumental. But it wasn't Penny herself who cracked first. It was her accomplice. The man who had carried out the attack, the one Penny had trusted to do her bidding, was apprehended. He was a criminal with a history of violent offenses, and when he was caught, he didn't hesitate to give up the name of the woman who had put him up to it. Penny's role in the plot was revealed in chilling detail. The police had already known about the suspicious texts between Penny and the accomplice, but now they had the confirmation they needed. The man, realizing he was facing severe charges, quickly gave up Penny's name in exchange for a lighter sentence. He described how Penny had manipulated him into helping her destroy her sister's life, how she had promised him money in exchange for his silence, and how he had played his part in the plan. Penny said, "The revelation hit like a bombshell. The authorities were no longer just chasing a shadow. They had their proof, and now Penny's world was about to come crashing down." The accomplice's testimony was the final piece of the puzzle, but it wasn't the only evidence that sealed Penny's fate. The investigators had found security footage showing Penny's interactions with the man leading up to the attack, and there were even more incriminating messages between the two, plotting the attack with cold precision. As the investigation closed in on Penny, she became more erratic, more defensive. She knew the walls were closing in and there was no way out. The detectives, now with a mountain of evidence against her, finally arrested Penny. The weight of the truth had come crashing down around her, and nothing she said or did could undo the horrors she had committed. The arrest was swift, and Penny was taken into custody. The news of her involvement in such a heinous crime shocked the community. No one, not even her closest friends, could believe that Penny was capable of such cold-blooded betrayal. Penny Sullivan, the woman who had once been seen as a loving sister, had now become the face of an unimaginable crime. The aftermath of the investigation was brutal for everyone involved. Rachel, although relieved that the truth had finally come to light, was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. The justice that had eluded her for so long had finally caught up with her sister, but the scars Penny had left on Rachel would remain forever. Penny's downfall was swift, but the damage she had caused would last for a lifetime, and as the investigation continued to unfold, more details about her twisted motivations were uncovered. Penny's jealousy, her desperation to tear down her sister's happiness, and her willingness to destroy everything for her own twisted satisfaction were all laid bare for the world to see. As Penny faced trial, it became clear that justice, however slow, had been served. The world now knew what Penny had done, and she would pay for the destruction she had caused. But for Rachel, there would be no real closure, not for the nightmare her sister had brought into her life. The pain of betrayal, the trauma of the attack, and the scars of a broken family would forever haunt her. The darkest chapter of their lives had been written, but the consequences of Penny's actions would echo through the years, a painful reminder of the depths of human jealousy and the unthinkable betrayal of family. The investigation was over, the pieces had all fallen into place, and now the day of reckoning had arrived for Penny Sullivan. The truth that she had carefully hidden for so long was about to be revealed to the world. Penny's arrest was nothing short of shocking, because the woman who had been so calm, so calculated in her cruelty, was now faced with the reality of her actions. The moment the authorities knocked on her door, Penny's world turned upside down. The sister who had once been so close to Rachel, the woman who had seemingly led a normal life, was now the center of a scandalous crime that no one could have predicted. Penny's reaction to the arrest was almost theatrical. but beneath the surface the terror was palpable. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Penny's face twisted in shock. This was not how she had imagined it ending. In the moments that followed, Penny was silent. There were no shouts, no protests, no fiery denials. She simply stared into the eyes of the officers, her lips trembling as she struggled to comprehend what had just happened. At first, Penny remained calm. She tried to keep her composure, but as the police led her away, the tears came. The tears were not of remorse, but of fear. Fear that her perfect world had come crashing down, and that there was no escape from the consequences she had long avoided. The interrogation room was cold, clinical. Penny was seated across from detectives who were determined to break her down, to get her to confess. The tension was thick in the air as the police began their questioning, each word deliberately chosen to push Penny further into the corner. But Penny didn't give them the satisfaction of a confession right away. The transcripts from the interrogation reveal a chilling exchange. Penny at first tried to feign ignorance, claiming that she had no idea why her sister had been attacked. She insisted she was innocent, that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. Detective: Penny, we know you were involved. We have evidence that ties you to the crime. Your texts, your calls, everything points to you. You don't get to deny this anymore. Penny: I don't know what you're talking about. I've done nothing wrong. Why would I hurt my own sister? I love Rachel. Detective: Then why did you lead her into a trap? Why was she alone when the attack happened? Penny, paused, his voice trembling. I didn't mean for this to happen. It wasn't supposed to be like this. As the hours passed, Penny's resolve began to crack. The truth seeped out slowly, first in fragments, then in an overwhelming rush. Penny confessed, not in one clean statement, but through the cracks in her story. She admitted to masterminding the attack, but still there was no real remorse in her words. Her justification was chilling. Penny had done it because she believed Rachel had taken everything from her, her youth, her beauty, her happiness. The next phase of the saga unfolded in the courtroom. The trial was a spectacle, a moment of reckoning for both Penny and Rachel. As Penny sat in the defendant's chair, her posture stiff and cold, the weight of her actions became undeniable. The courtroom was filled with gasps, whispers, and the slow unfolding of the truth. The pivotal moment of the trial came when Rachel was called to the stand. It was her testimony that would bring everything to light. Rachel, trembling, had to face her sister, a woman she had once loved and trusted. The emotional toll was evident in her voice as she recounted the nightmare she had lived through. Rachel's words were raw, each sentence a wound that would never fully heal. Rachel, she was my sister. I trusted her. She was supposed to be the one person I could count on. I never imagined she could hurt me like this. The pain, the betrayal, it's something I will never be able to get over. I don't understand why she did this to me. I don't think I ever will. Rachel's voice cracked as she continued, her testimony painting a picture of unimaginable pain, of a woman who had been crushed under the weight of betrayal by the one person who should have protected her. It was clear that Penny's crime had torn Rachel apart in ways no one could fully understand. The defense tried to paint Penny as a victim of circumstance, a woman driven to madness by jealousy, by the pressures of her life. But the jury wasn't buying it. The evidence was irrefutable, and Penny's cold demeanor only served to solidify her guilt in the eyes of those who had witnessed the trial. When the jury delivered their verdict, the room was heavy with the weight of what had transpired. Penny Sullivan was found guilty of orchestrating the brutal attack on her own sister. The judge, with a voice filled with finality, pronounced Penny's sentence. Penny was sentenced to life in prison, with no possibility of parole. The crime she had committed was so heinous, so cold-blooded, that there was no room for leniency. She had destroyed a life, shattered a family, and left scars that would never fade. Penny's final moments in the courtroom were a study in denial. She didn't cry. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She simply stared straight ahead, as though the reality of her actions hadn't fully settled in. The courtroom was a cacophony of emotions, but Penny remained eerily still, a woman who had never truly accepted the magnitude of her crime. But what became of Penny after the trial? Was she filled with regret, or had her cruelty become so ingrained that she still felt justified in her actions? The truth was more unsettling than anyone could have imagined. Years later, an interview with Penny revealed a woman unchanged by time or regret. Behind the cold walls of her prison cell, Penny spoke without remorse, her voice calm, collected, as though the years had done nothing to soften her heart. Interviewer: do you regret what you did to your sister? Do you feel any guilt? Penny, quietly, without emotion: I did what I had to do. Rachel had everything. She was perfect, and I was always second place. She didn't deserve it. I don't feel sorry for her. She's fine now. She'll get over it. I did what I needed to do. It was a chilling response. Penny had never truly faced the consequences of her actions in the way that most would. For her, the crime had been about power, about control. And now, in the cold isolation of prison, Penny's twisted justification continued to echo in the halls of her mind. She was a woman broken, but not by guilt. She was broken by a lifelong obsession with jealousy, a force so powerful that it had led her to destroy the very person she should have loved. Penny Sullivan's story is a haunting reminder of the darkness that can reside in the hearts of those closest to us. In her pursuit of jealousy, she destroyed her family, leaving scars that would never fully heal. And as the years pass, the truth remains. There are some betrayals that are so deep, so unfathomable, that they can never be forgiven. The story of Penny Sullivan is one that will leave a mark on anyone who hears it. It's the tale of a woman who let envy, resentment, and bitterness consume her until there was nothing left but a cold, heartless act. Penny's crime against her sister, a crime so unspeakable it defies belief, is a stark reminder of just how dangerous jealousy can be. For Penny, nothing in her life was ever enough. She could never be happy as long as her sister thrived in the spotlight, and so she sought to destroy her. But in the end, Penny's actions only led her to her own downfall. She may have taken Rachel's peace, her innocence, but what did Penny really gain? This is a crime that raises a chilling question. Does anyone really win in the end when jealousy is allowed to dictate the course of their life? Penny may have succeeded in temporarily silencing the one person who made her feel invisible, but in the long run, her actions have left her trapped in a prison of her own making. And Rachel, the victim of this horrific betrayal, she may never be whole again, but she has fought through the darkness, finding the strength to heal. Penny Sullivan thought she could take it all, but in the end she lost herself, and the void inside her never got filled. No amount of control, manipulation, or cruelty could ever do that. So, did Penny truly win? Could there have been another way? Perhaps we'll never know. But what we do know is this: jealousy is a dangerous weapon, one that can consume even the most loved and seemingly innocent among us. Penny Sullivan destroyed her family in pursuit of something that was never meant to be hers, and for that she paid the ultimate price. Now it's your turn. What do you think? Was Penny always a monster, or did jealousy consume her to the point of no return? Was there any chance of redemption, or was she always bound to this dark path? Let's discuss in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts on this tragic and horrifying tale of sibling rivalry gone horribly wrong. If you found this case as shocking as I did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true crime stories that explore the darkest corners of human nature. This is a story that might haunt you for a long time, but one that serves as a powerful reminder that jealousy doesn't just hurt, it destroys. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, sometimes the real monsters are the ones closest to us.